Finally, the spice will flow after all. After a near year-long delay, the, the real big screen adaptation of Frank Herbert's influential sci-fi novel Dune is finally in theaters and HBO Max. So here I am to give my thoughts. First, the first non-spoiler segment, and then a few seconds, and then the spoiler segment. But man, there is just so much here to cover that I feel I could almost make a whole discussion out of this. But I won't. And I'll keep this somewhat shorter than usual compared to my other reviews. Because of that, for this review, I won't go too much into context into the story's plot, because again, there's just too much to say, so I'll just say the basics. Paul Atreides is a young man and the prince of two rulers from deep into the future of space, where their family and their whole, not kingdom, but army, or house, quote unquote, are told by the Emperor to take control of the planet Arrakis and have proper production on spice, but they have to deal with the rivals, the Harkonnens, and the native people, the Fremen, all that while having to survive the dangers of the desert, the heat, and giant sandworms. And that's possibly the most basic thing I could say, because man, there is so much lore that I felt my brain expanding and throbbing a bit, not literally, because of all the information I had to process by the time I was getting to sleep. And wow. Okay, I'll start with the positives. This movie is actually pretty great. I had some issues with it, which I'll explain in the spoiler segment, but this was a pretty satisfying adaptation, whether you're a fan of the books or not. It's a pretty good movie, but knowing Denis Villeneuve's track record, speaking of which, he is the perfect choice to direct this, especially since I really enjoyed Blade Runner 2049. He does wonders with this, especially with the dense source material and long length, as he does the best what he can with what he's given, to flesh out this living, breathing world that gives Dune an identity of its own. So you can't go out and say, oh, Dune copied Star Wars, or it copied this and that. Like, nope, this is its own universe, with its own rules and unique characters. So yeah, he does that pretty well. It makes it pretty understandable and accessible for people who have probably never heard of Dune before and coming in with a fresh mind. And he's pretty enjoyable. The performances are great. The score is fantastic, as it gives such a level of atmosphere the movie was already giving off with its visuals, which I'll get to more later. Because with Hans Zimmer, he's my favorite film composer, but he's been kind of having a slump, not counting the Lion King remake. But I think his last two great scores were Dunkirk and Blade Runner 2049 back in 2017. So I'm glad he's back in full force too, especially with what he did off. It's perfect for the atmosphere of this world and the source material. Also, this is so far the most beautiful movie I've seen this year. Like with the cinematography, the visuals, and the special effects, it's all top notch and next level, and you can feel it. You can feel, I could describe the visuals as giant size. These giant spaceships, these giant vehicles, these giant landscapes, and these giant sandworms. It gives us, even with its slowish pacing, you just feel this sense of grandeur and awe that you feel you can't get that bored with it, because it just grabs you by the eyeballs. That's impressive. Like, this feels like a concept art book come to life, because when I look at concept art books, even when the movie is already epic, when I look at these books, it feels like because they're more epic. But this feels like it manages that level I wish more blockbusters. I wish more sci-fi movies of this type would feel and look this epic. So that I can give props to the entire creative team. Also, the costume design is outstanding. The production design feels lived in and detailed. The sound is pretty great. This is the definition of a true cinematic movie, because watching in a theater rather than a computer or phone, the feeling it gives off is as cinematic as you can get. And yeah, what else can I say? Because mostly I can praise the technical side from it. Also, speaking of which, the director's movies are usually pretty slow paced but complex. It's slow with not much going on despite its epic stature, but it comes off so close to getting boring but it's paced surprisingly well for a slow meditative sci-fi movie. So if somebody or anybody were to call this movie boring, I would not get upset because it's understandable. But for me, it worked mostly, but it worked. So, damn. Also, this actually no, I'll say that point to later. But yeah, this is from a technical achievement and from a pacing. Well, it's from a technical standpoint and the pacing standpoint, it's pretty great. But this is where I'll get to the spoiler segment, which I'll give out a few seconds. If you haven't been following the development cycle of this movie and you're watching this blindly, then you're going to be surprised because they split the story into 2 movies. And that's not just counting the many sequels of the book. They split it off at a point where audiences might find it unsatisfying. Not me, because I enjoyed the story and I'm actually kind of hyped for the sequel if it ever gets greenlit, because for the moment of this recording, it has not been officially greenlit or gone to real pre-production. But yeah, they split it off halfway, I think. Not sure whether if you've seen the ending, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure how far this is into the book, but it does set up a lot of the necessary components to make the second half feel extra triumphant. So, here's to good thinking and wishes. The negatives. They could be seen as negatives, but since the good parts are so good, it doesn't dwarf that much. But for one, most of the ensemble cast doesn't feel developed enough. I feel the best developed characters are Paul, Jessica, and Leto, but mostly everyone else only gets a few scenes or have a good chunk, but don't feel like you should get invested. And I know that the book was written all the way back in the 60s because storytelling was very different back then than it was now. And I'm aware probably most of these characters aren't major characters, but because they're so happen to be played by charismatic A-listers, at first glance you may believe there's more to them than you might assume. And by the fact they only get a few scenes, it kind of can't disappoint if you're a fan of these actors, or we're hoping to see more of them as in the book. Because, let's say for example, Dave Bautista's character. I love Dave Bautista. But then, he's gone. He's back again, and he's gone. Then David Dastmalchian's character. He's there, but then he's out. And then, extra spoiler alert, but this is the spoiler segment, he dies. I was like, that's a shame. Javier Bardem, I love him. He's there, and he's gone for a huge chunk of the movie and doesn't appear again to like the 3rd act. So probably these characters weren't meant to be major, but again, since you have to get these big name actors to play them, you might assume they're like these complex, fully realized characters, but only a few of them actually feel complex. And also that's including the main antagonist, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, he looks great, and he's scary as hell. It's that the whole design of the whole Harkonnen architecture and culture is fantastic, but there's just not enough of them. Probably they'll be getting more of them because of how the movie, what they do, and how the movie ends. But I feel for like these guys who are supposed to be like the main driving force, they don't get that much of it, because I feel like the Baron only gets 4 scenes in this whole thing. And I do wish there could be more of him, because he was intimidating, he had a great design, he had lots of potential, but he was barely there. And I understood his motivations of him wanting to get his the spice production back. He wants Arrakis to himself and his people, and you can see and understand the motivation, but you can't feel it because there's just not enough of him. And that's just the same for most of the cast. You know what their deal is, but you just can't feel them because there aren't enough of them. And I guess there's not necessarily too many characters because they're not meant to be that huge, but since they're played by celebrities, like the marketing suggested, it kind of might feel some people underwhelmed to see the entire cast perform at their best, when it's only a few characters are actually important. In fact, I've heard that minor bits of lore aren't in the movie that kind of took away a bit of the experience of them, but didn't ruin it. And I can sort of see it because even though it's paced well, some elements I feel like they've been glossed over or skipped to sake for like not making this movie too long. Because 2 hours and a half is kind of a lot, especially for people who are new to this. Because yeah, some elements don't get that much attention, and also 3 major characters from the book, Emperor Shaddam, Princess Irulan, and Faye Rautha, aren't even in the movie. The Emperor is mentioned a lot, but he's not even in it. Like, you can't even see him. So maybe they're saving them for the sequel, but they are pretty major characters. What else? That's the biggest negative, is that I could call the movie incomplete, but it was kind of always the plan. Like, they put in Avengers Infinity War / Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows without the epic cliffhanger, like Empire Strikes Back style or Infinity War style. So it does feel a bit empty, but I'm still hyped for the sequel. But it's just how it had to be, unfortunately. Trying to think, because again, I could go into a whole ass discussion on this, but I don't want to. They might get more, especially, it's a shame, and I already knew about this, but it was already a shame that Zendaya's Chani barely had any screen time, because I love Zendaya, and I would love to see her kick a lot of butt, but she doesn't do that much fighting. In fact, she doesn't fight at all. But she does leave off a presence because of the constant visions. But yeah, this is pretty great, especially for someone that loves blockbuster films and lower budget art house films equally. So this was like a perfect-ish mix, which prevented me from disliking it, like some would. But good thing most of the audience that has seen this movie has enjoyed it, so that means they are willing to be patient. But what does suck is that, unlike Infinity War, you do know when the second half of the story is coming, which is a year after, but with this, it's not even confirmed, because I'm not even sure the studio wants to commit. So it's like, it kind of leaves you a weird spot, because what if they never make a sequel to this? Like, what if this is ends up of just part 1 with no part 2? Or the second part comes out too late, and it just leaves you with nothing? Because let's say if this movie were to be greenlit now, the sequel could come out late 2023, and because I wish, with all the crazy lore and story, this does deserve to be a franchise. But it makes me wonder with the sequels, like for example Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and God Emperor Dune, would the actors want to come back for that many sequels? Who knows? But that's how I'll give it for it now. I don't want to go too long for this movie because there's just it's either I say too little or I say too much. I feel this is the right amount so people can know. I give this movie an 8.7 out of 10. Weirdly that it didn't mention the spice that much or the politics despite being a major part of the books. Anyway, the spice must flow because he who controls the spice controls the universe.